For 2022, Mitsubishi has given the Eclipse Cross, their smallest crossover in the United States, a bit of a refresh. It gets longer and a little bit more conventional for 2022. In case you're wondering, yes, the Eclipse Cross skipped a model year. There was no 2021 model. The front end design has been tweaked slightly, but it is still instantly recognizable as a Mitsubishi. The LED headlights that this model has are optional, halogens are standard. One important thing to keep in mind about the Eclipse Cross is that this is still a tweener vehicle, even though it has grown for 2022. The size on the outside may be pretty similar to a RAV4, but its price tag is thousands of dollars less. And that's why, as we look around this vehicle, it feels a bit more subcompact. So if you're looking for something that's in that price range, but gives you a bit more room on the inside, you might want to take a look at this. The new Eclipse Cross is a little bit more than 5 inches longer than the outgoing model. Most of the difference happens right back here in the cargo area behind the second row seats. The seats themselves do not move, so we have exactly the same kind of legroom that we had before. This is now almost exactly the same size in terms of length as the Toyota RAV4, so you might think that this is a compact crossover. But in terms of legroom and cargo capacity, this is a little bit below where we find the RAV4 and the CR-V. In my mind, that's not much of a problem because the price tag of the Eclipse Cross is also below the RAV4 and CR-V. This starts under $24,000, and with the typical discounts that you'll find on the Mitsubishi dealer lot, this should be thousands of dollars less than the average compact crossover. So you could look at this really as an upgrade from a subcompact or an alternative to a compact crossover if you don't need quite as much room inside. Design-wise, the biggest change happens out back, where we have a much more conventionally styled rear end. That's a good thing and a bad thing, I suppose, because this is a lot less distinctive than it was before. I admit that this is more attractive to my eye, but I do know some people that absolutely loved the outgoing design, so be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. We have amber turn signals, which is certainly my preference, and we still have a relatively raked rear window, which means that cargo practicality is going to be a little bit below some of the competition that may be a bit squarer. The Eclipse Cross's drivetrain also lives somewhere between worlds. Like the Honda CR-V, this has a 1.5-liter turbocharged engine connected to a continuously variable automatic transmission. But the power figures are a little bit closer to the average subcompact crossover. This engine produces 152 horsepower, but the torque figures are a little bit closer to the average compact crossover at 184 pound-feet. If you choose all-wheel drive like the model that I'm driving today, fuel economy comes in at 25 miles per gallon. That's a little bit closer to the average compact crossover. Front seat comfort is a little bit difficult to divine. I'm going to give this 7 out of 10 points because you could logically cross-shop this with a number of compact crossovers. Keep in mind, of course, they're going to be more expensive, but you will find more adjustable seats in those options. We don't have any adjustable lumbar support, and I am driving effectively the top-end trim. We do, however, have a power driver's seat. Rather surprisingly, we also have a power passenger seat with the same range of motion as the driver's seat, but again, no adjustable lumbar support. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty decent range of motion. Jumping into the back, we find 76.2 inches of combined legroom. The position of the front row seats and the second row seats did not change for 2022. So I still have about 4 inches of legroom left, and the rear seats do have a recline function to them, if I can locate that. It's a little lever right back there. If I put it in its very upright position, then my head is touching the ceiling. This model has a dual pane panoramic moonroof design, and if I put the seats back a little bit, I do gain a little bit more headroom, but it may feel a little bit unusual, I guess slouchy, to sit in that position. We have heated rear seats with controls right here in the center console. If I sit in the center seat position, there's definitely a little bit less headroom than you'll find in subcompact crossovers. And moving all the way over here to the right side, where I had a 6'5" person comfortably sitting up front, I can definitely stretch out back here as long as the seat is reclined. One interesting touch is that the sunshade for this rear section of the sunroof is powered. Behind the restyled hatch, we find just over 23 cubic feet of cargo space, so certainly less than you'll find in a RAV4 or CR-V, but above a number of the smallest subcompact crossovers. The big reason this didn't grow more is because, again, the hatch opening is still pretty raked right back here. That meant that I was still able to fit 4 24-inch roller bags, not quite as many as you'd get in a RAV4. But according to Mitsubishi, the floor area of the cargo area is up by 11% versus the outgoing model. It definitely looks longer, a little bit closer to me as I'm standing right here, and a little bit squarer perhaps. But again, due to the shape of this opening, I wasn't able to fit more luggage back here. You might be able to fit a few more handbags, but nothing terribly large. Under the load floor, we do find a temporary spare tire, which is a nice touch. Some extra storage area right there in that foam divider. And I suppose if you remove the foam dividers, you could get a little bit more storage space. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in essentially the top-end trim today. We have this dual-pane moonroof, one right over the driver and front passengers' heads, and then that smaller one you saw before. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts and height adjustable headrests. The bolstering on the front seats is a little bit more aggressive than you'll typically find in a vehicle in this price category, although I didn't find it to be a problem. We find a few more soft touch materials on the front door as well. We have a soft touch upper section, soft touch mid section right there, and an interesting texture to the plastic panel right there around the window switches. The glove compartment features a two-tier design where we have a slot for the instruction manual and then a bin below. I was barely able to fit a 10-inch iPad inside. The majority of the dashboard is a soft touch unit, although the glove compartment is a hard plastic as you'd expect. In the middle of the dashboard, we have your choice of either a 7-inch or an 8-inch color touchscreen infotainment system, depending on the version of the Eclipse Cross that you get. The software interface is intuitive and easy to use. It's fairly snappy, but it does seem a little bit old school in terms of its design. We have some touch buttons along the bottom. You can get direct access over to the built-in navigation interface, direct access to your smartphone as well. There's a tune and a power and volume knob. Below that, we have two large air vents. You'll find the buttons for the hazard light right there. The dual zone automatic climate control controls are below that. We also have a control for the heated steering wheel, the eco mode, two USB inputs there, a small area where you can store your smartphone, but as you can see, it's not quite large enough for some of those larger smartphones. We have a pretty conventional console shifter here, toggles for the heated seat controls. Some people may like these, some people may not. These will stay enabled if you are living in a colder climate and you want your heated seat to always be on. That's there. We have a button to change the all-wheel drive mode, gravel, normal, and snow. Then below that, we have an electric parking brake button, auto brake hold, and then two pretty decently sized cup holders between the front seats. The center armrest is softly padded and opens to reveal a fairly small storage compartment. I was not able to fit a half-gallon inside. On the driver's side, there's an available heads-up display, but the image is not projected on the windshield. It's actually projected on this small sheet of plastic that folds up from on top of the instrument cluster. Speaking of the instrument cluster, that's a mainly analog unit with a small color multifunction display in the middle that gives us things like additional readouts, as well as fuel economy and your trip computer. The steering wheel is a round design. It's leather wrapped in this trim with a black insert right down here around the bottom. Behind the steering wheel, we find some of the best paddle shifters you'll find on a new car at any price. These don't move with the steering wheel, which is certainly the preference of some folks out there, and they're magnesium, which is really a nice touch. Rather unfortunately, they are mated to a continuously variable automatic transmission, and personally, I think that paddle shifters on a CVT are about as useful as paddle shifters on a French Poodle. In my 0 to 60 testing, the Eclipse Cross took 8.8 seconds to go 0 to 60, but thanks to the torque from this turbocharged engine, it feels a little bit peppier than that number would otherwise indicate. One thing that you should know is that this CVT shifts a little bit faster than some of Nissan's CVTs, but not quite as rapidly as the Honda CVT in the CR-V. So if I floor it, it takes a little bit for the transmission to effectively downshift and give me the acceleration that I'm looking for. But the 1.5-liter turbo certainly feels peppier than the naturally aspirated engine that we find in the Honda HR-V, and the HR-V is a little bit closer to the price tag of this. When thinking about comparisons for the Eclipse Cross, it's important to remember that this really does straddle the line in so many ways. So you could logically compare upper-end trims of the Eclipse Cross to lower-end trims of the average compact crossover, and lower-end trims of this to upper-end trims of a lot of subcompact crossovers that are smaller and less expensive, and generally speaking less refined than the Eclipse Cross. This really does live between worlds. This reminds me a lot in that same way as the Jeep Compass and the Subaru Crosstrek, because they also land somewhat between realities. In my braking test, it took 123 feet to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0. That's almost exactly the same distance that it took the last Eclipse Cross that I tested. One thing that's definitely different than the last Eclipse Cross, however, is the refinement of the suspension. They've definitely tweaked things around the edges. This wasn't a complete wholesale redesign of the suspension, so this doesn't feel quite assorted to some of the sportiest entries out there, but they have done a nice job of polishing around the edges. As far as handling goes, I'm going to give this a B, but keep in mind that you will find better handling compact crossovers. The more expensive the vehicle, the more money they can spend on suspension tuning, suspension refinement, and of course suspension design. So this is not going to feel like a Mazda CX-5 in terms of the steering feel or the connectedness to the road, but it is going to be less expensive. And I would actually say that the rear suspension feels a little bit more sorted than the one that we find in the Mazda CX-30. The CX-30 does not get a fully independent suspension in the rear. Out on a rougher road like the one that I'm on here, I'm going to give the Eclipse Cross a B when it comes to ride quality. This has been improved over the outgoing model. I was able to sample one very briefly from a Mitsubishi dealer, a 2020 model year vehicle, and you could definitely tell that the suspension wasn't quite as settled as it is in the model that I'm driving today. As I said at the beginning of this video, comparisons are a little bit tricky because you could compare this to so many other vehicles out there, so certainly keep that in mind. There are going to be compact crossovers on the larger side of things like the Nissan Rogue that will ride a bit better than the Eclipse Cross. Then there are going to be some relatively inexpensive subcompact crossovers that might be within the price range of this particular Eclipse Cross that are not going to ride quite as well. In my cabin noise testing at 50 miles an hour, I measured 73 decibels in here, making this pretty average for the subcompact category, a little bit loud for the compact segment. Much like the last time I drove the Eclipse Cross, fuel economy has been excellent this week. I've been averaging 29 mpg. According to the EPA, this should average 25. I think the big reason for that is that the Eclipse Cross is very efficient out on the highway. So in steady state travel, 65 to 70 miles an hour, the fuel economy is excellent. This also is pretty efficient when hill climbing, which is a little bit surprising. Logically, if you're spending a lot of time in stop and go or slow and go traffic, a lot of time in true city driving where you're stopping at stoplights, then your fuel economy number will be below the one that I was averaging. This vehicle does not have an auto start-stop system. Obviously, it's not a hybrid either. Bottom line, if you liked the Eclipse Cross before, you're probably going to love this Eclipse Cross. If you didn't care for the Eclipse Cross before, there probably has not been enough of a change to change your mind. One of the big things for me is the revised infotainment software. I know I'm talking about that in the drive section, but I forgot to mention it earlier. This no longer has the funky trackpad that Mitsubishi attempted for a short while. I love the fact that Mitsubishi tried it, said nope, that didn't work, and then deleted it from the car, rather than doing a Lexus and just forcing you to use it for generation after generation after generation. The touchscreen is just easier to use. But while I'm talking about things other than the drive section, I will mention that if you're a taller person, I'm only 6 feet tall, there are people that are a lot taller than I am, this heads-up display cannot be adjusted for me to actually see the entire top of the display. It just doesn't go far enough in that direction. So right now I'm looking at the speedometer and the top of the speed is cut off. For 2022, the Eclipse Cross starts at $23,395. That's definitely less expensive than the majority of compact crossovers in the US. That makes sense, of course, because the Eclipse Cross is a little bit of a tweener. They're calling it a compact crossover, but it is a little bit smaller than some of the other options in this group. But it is still bigger than the average subcompact crossover. We also have a 1.5-liter turbo engine that is standard, that produces a bit more oomph than we find in a lot of really small crossovers in the US. And more importantly, there are likely going to be a ton of discounts on the Mitsubishi dealer lot. Right now, without even asking, if you just go and hunt on a Mitsubishi dealer website, it looks like there's at least $1,000 to $1,500 off. Depending on the features you're looking for, the upper end trims of the Eclipse Cross might be an even better deal compared against the average compact crossover, because you'll find key features in those models that you'll pay a lot more for in the average compact CUV. With that out of the way, let's dive into the first competitor, which has to be the Toyota RAV4. It's the best-selling vehicle in the compact segment. The RAV4 is a decent amount more expensive, however. It's going to be at least $3,000 more, and based on the average dealer discounts that we're seeing out there right now, it's probably going to be $4,000 to perhaps even $5,000 more. On the other hand, the RAV4 is going to give you more power. We have just over 200 horsepower standard. There's also a hybrid system, a plug-in hybrid system available, and generally speaking, more features and more options available in the RAV4. It's also a little bit roomier feeling because it's a little bit larger in pretty much every dimension versus the Eclipse Cross. We also, of course, have Toyota's legendary reliability, which definitely seems to be holding true with this generation of the RAV4, especially the hybrid model. And that hybrid model, even though it is going to be a lot more expensive, it's going to start north of $28,000, will really give you about 40 miles per gallon in mixed driving. So depending on exactly how long you plan on keeping your vehicle and exactly which version of the Eclipse Cross you're looking at, the hybrid RAV4 could be within your reach in terms of price. Now, the Honda CR-V is a little bit less expensive. It's about $1,000 less in terms of base price than the RAV4, but it doesn't come with exactly the same kind of feature content standard. It's also worth noting that the CR-V is due for a redesign here relatively soon. If we follow the typical cadence of Honda releases, it's probably going to happen sometime next year, in calendar year 2022. Perhaps the most direct competitor for the Eclipse Cross is the Nissan Rogue Sport. It's another tweener in this segment that really is more compact crossover sized than subcompact. And this is because in the Nissan product line, they have a ton of crossovers. They have the front-wheel drive only Nissan Kicks, that is solidly a subcompact crossover. They have the Nissan Rogue, which is a large-ish compact crossover. And then they've got the Rogue Sport, known as the Qashqai internationally, that is sort of jammed right in between. As a result of this lineup, the Rogue Sport is almost exactly the same size as the Eclipse Cross. It really is eerie. We have almost exactly the same kind of rear legroom, almost the exact kind of cargo capacity, very similar size, inside, outside, etc. And keep in mind that Nissan now owns Mitsubishi, but these two vehicles have zero in common with one another. They're absolutely unrelated because the Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross was designed before the Mitsubishi-Nissan tie-up, and the Rogue Sport was also designed before that tie-up. So they actually share absolutely nothing, even though the new Outlander and the Rogue are basically the same vehicle. One's the Mitsubishi version of the Nissan. This vehicle is not related to the Rogue Sport at all. Now, the Rogue Sport is pretty similarly priced. It's a little bit more expensive, just over $24,000. No turbo, so it is going to feel a little bit different, not exactly slower per se, just different. It's not going to have the same kind of torque. It also has a CVT. But I think that the Rogue Sport comes across as feeling a little bit more premium. I like the interior design of the Rogue Sport, and I like the exterior design just a little bit better. You should also know that the Rogue Sport generally is going to have very similar deals on it as what we see in the Mitsubishi. I have to say, if I were shopping between these two vehicles, I would probably get the Nissan. Now, how about a truly subcompact crossover, something like the Hyundai Kona? Well, the Kona has relatively similar legroom, shockingly enough, but it's not as wide. It definitely is a smaller vehicle on the outside in terms of length and in terms of width, and the width is noticeable in the back seat. Also in the cargo area, the cargo opening is going to be narrower, and the cargo area itself is definitely smaller. So some of the cost difference is going to be associated with that upsize in terms of the exterior dimensions. Price-wise, these two vehicles aren't too far off. The Kona starts just under $21,000, and Hyundai hasn't been putting as much cash on the hood as we used to see them do about 10 years ago. And that's going to drive the price tag of these two vehicles an awful lot closer. The Kona also comes with a naturally aspirated 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, not the small turbo that we find in the Eclipse Cross. So again, it's going to feel a little bit different. It's not going to be quite as peppy feeling, especially in mountain climbing or in some city driving situations. The Eclipse Cross is a solid small crossover. The styling update has helped keep it fresh, and Mitsubishi's aggressive pricing has helped keep it relevant. Exactly what you end up paying for your Eclipse Cross, I think, will really determine exactly how it ends up comparing to some of the competition. I would say that the Nissan Rogue is better. The RAV4 is a better crossover as well, but they're going to cost you more. And depending on the deal you could work, that price difference could be 10 or even 15% different. But I have to admit that if my own money were on the line in this segment and I was specifically looking for a vehicle between $23,000 and say $25,000, I might get the Rogue Sport over the Eclipse Cross. I think the Rogue Sport is a slightly better deal. Also, keep in mind there are a ton of really, really great subcompact crossovers out there. And many of those larger subcompact crossovers will give you pretty similar interior room for a price tag that is suspiciously close to the Eclipse Cross. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below, and what would you get if you were shopping for something that was a little bit less expensive than a RAV4 or CRV. Also, be sure and find us over at facebook.com/AlexOnAutos so you can see what I'm driving this week, Instagram, all those other social places. You can check out the merch store at AOAmerch.com, and I'll see all of you later.